Welcome to the Talk Like a Leader podcast, where we explore the mindset, skill set, and habit set of leadership communication. Using these tips, techniques, and tactics, you'll be able to talk like a leader to build better relationships and get more done. Your host is Guy Harris, who has more than 20 years of combined professional and military experience in consulting, coaching, and training in areas like team and interaction dynamics, communication strategies and tactics, as well as emotional intelligence. Take it away, Guy.
Hi, this is Guy Harris. Welcome to Talk Like a Leader. This week's episode is titled 4 Ways to Improve Your Communication Effectiveness. Now, if you've listened to this podcast for a while, I suspect you're going to hear threads of things I've said in other podcast episodes. This episode is, I guess you'd say, a bit of a collection of ideas condensed into 4 takeaway concepts that really are a combination of multiple ideas all in one place. So let's get started with 4 things you can do, or 4 ways to improve your communication effectiveness. Now, the first thing you can do is you can spend some time and effort learning how other people might hear, see, or interpret your messages. That involves studying something like the DISC model, and we have resources at discpersonalitytesting.com. We have another number of podcast episodes related to the DISC model. Those are all targeted at the idea that if you can use some frame of reference other than your own to understand how other people might see things, how other people might hear your messages, then you can adjust your messages to better fit how they see and interpret things. Likewise, if you better understand how they see and interpret things, you can adjust your interpretation so that you're using their language or their filter or their perspective as a way to view the word choice they use, the tone they use, the body language that goes with their word choice and tone, the whole communication package. So learn how other people might hear, see, or interpret your messages. And you might add to that how they might hear, see, or interpret your messages other than you intended them. And it really comes down to understanding the difference between you and other people and be more aware and intentional about understanding those differences. And the second thing you can do is learn how to observe your perspective. Now, this one's kind of hard to describe. It's the idea of taking a sort of an out-of-body experience and observing what's going on, trying to objectively view the situation you're in, to basically check your perspective, to see if it's valid, to see if you're being unfairly triggered by something someone else said, you're getting irritated unnecessarily, that kind of thing. I use myself as an example just to kind of paint a picture of what I mean by this. I tend to be very logical, very linear, very analytical, very precise in my word choice, meaning that I tend, as a general rule, in most situations, to pick my words very carefully to say exactly what I'm trying to say. So the word choice, the word order means a lot to me. So I will tend, if I'm not careful, to interpret others through that same filter. I will assume that their word choice was carefully chosen and very particular. I will be less accepting by nature, less flexible to hear the emotion of what people are saying in preference to the specific words they're using. I will put too much emphasis on words and not enough emphasis on feeling or emotion. Well, observe your perspective means that I can understand this about myself. And when a communication goes badly, when I'm feeling frustrated, when I'm feeling unheard, when I'm feeling like I'm not hearing the other person well, I can attempt to step out of the moment and basically ask myself, Guy, are you being too linear here? Could they mean something other than what you are saying, you are interpreting? Could they be hearing you in a way different from what you think you're saying? Could there be some sort of disconnect that is created by the fact that you're very linear and logical and analytical, and that's not their natural perspective? And so stepping out for a moment is applying really the first idea of learning how to identify how other people might hear, see, or interpret your messages, and take your knowledge of the difference between you and them to observe how you're engaging and how you're perceiving their message. So basically you can question yourself and keep yourself out of the weeds so that you don't make assumptions about things based on your perspective and ignore theirs. So observe your perspective. Think carefully about, is my perspective causing this problem, or is there something legitimately amiss here? And then the third thing you can do is learn to listen very actively. And the idea is to listen with the intent to understand rather than with the intent to reply. Listen with the intent to capture the whole message that's being said, paying attention to body language and tone, really the whole communication package. Actively listening. It takes some effort, it takes some focus, and maybe every single communication you have doesn't require active listening, but learn how to turn it on when it's necessary. When you're coaching someone on performance, when you're dealing with a highly emotional situation, when a conflict develops, in those kind of situations, learn how to listen very actively, engage intently in the listening process, and do everything you can to turn off other distracting ideas that might be running through your head. And then the fourth idea is to learn how to get and give feedback during communication. If we take the other three ideas, so learning how to see how other people might hear, see, or interpret your messages, observing your perspective, listening actively, even at the end of that process, when other people say things or do things during communication, your interpretation is merely that, your interpretation. You don't yet know whether it's an accurate interpretation. You don't yet know whether you've heard clearly or understood correctly what the other person was attempting to communicate. You do know what you did understand. You know what you did interpret. You just don't yet know if it's what they intended. So you have to seek feedback. The same thing can happen in reverse. We know for sure that whatever you said or did creates an impression for the other person. You said something, they heard something, they interpreted something as a result of it. You had a tone, you had a body language, you had a facial expression. It did send a message, and a message was received. What you don't know is if the message that was received was the message you intended to send. And the only way to find out if you're hearing the right message or interpreting the right message, or if they're hearing the message you intend or interpreting the message you intend, is to check. The only way we can know is to ask. Failing to ask means that we are making assumptions, and we don't want to assume, especially when the conflict is maybe emotional or sensitive or in a bad situation for a person. We want to listen very carefully and get and give feedback during the process. We want to ask questions like, this is what I'm hearing, or this is what I'm interpreting, or this is what I understand your idea is, or this is, if I understand correctly, this is your concern. Am I hearing that correctly? So we state it in a curious or inquisitive way and ask if we understand correctly. There are a lot of ways to do it. I just gave one. And the way I phrased it won't necessarily fit every situation you'll encounter. Hopefully it kind of sets the stage for you to understand exactly what I'm trying to say. We state what we think to be the intended message and ask if we understood correctly. The other thing we can do to ask for feedback from the other person, have to be careful, because asking for feedback on another person's perspective or having them repeat back to you what they said can sound a little condescending and arrogant if you're not really careful how you say it. If your body language isn't lined up really well, and if you use closed body language or sort of an accusatory tone rather than an inquiring tone, you can mess this up badly. The key is you just want to ask the other person what they understood from your message. Something you could do, here's a potential strategy, would be something like this. I know sometimes I get ahead of myself and I speak fast, or I mumble my words, or I leap ahead of myself in sentences. So I don't always convey exactly what I'm thinking. And I just like to check in to make sure that I was clear. Would you please help me by telling me what you understood me to say, or what message I delivered, so I can make sure that I was delivering it well, that I was doing it accurately, that I was doing it in a good way. So basically taking the blame on yourself to ease the burden on the other person so they don't feel like you're backing them into a corner. You want to make abundantly clear that your goal is to better communicate, not to question them. Okay, so there you have it. 4 ways to improve your communication effectiveness. It's a collection of skills, really, and it all comes down to the idea of understanding the complexity and difficulty of communication and taking some proactive steps to try to fix it. So we want to learn how other people might hear, see, or interpret our messages and apply that interpretation in reverse so we can understand the differences between the way they would say things and the way we would say them so that we can interpret their messages accurately. So learn about interpreting differences in communication. Be very careful and mindful about observing your perspective to see if maybe your perspective is the problem is the thing that's getting in the way and creating your communication problem. Then you want to listen very actively so you can pick up on nuance and what the other person says and get as much as you can from the communication picture. And then you want to get and give feedback. Liberally give feedback so you can check your understanding, and gently and carefully ask for feedback from them on how you communicated. If you'll do these 4 things, you can talk like a leader. This has been the Talk Like a Leader podcast. You can listen to this show every week wherever you get your podcast. If you haven't, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. I'm Guy Harris, and thanks for listening.